My name is Jerm. This is Germ Warfare, the battle of ideas.
For the third time in a few days, David Rasnick, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Well, we're getting to know each other, aren't we? Glad to be here.
So just for those who haven't been following, you and I chatted, I suppose, about a week ago, in which we covered your work on both HIV, AIDS, and cancer. It proved to be far too much for 1 hour. I asked you if you wouldn't mind returning so we could break those down into two separate conversations, one of which was on cancer. This one we'll chat about HIV and AIDS. Now, obviously, as a South African, this is pertinent to me because we were the epicenter of the whole narrative for a long, long time, and maybe we still are. But before we chat about that, David, if you wouldn't mind, just quickly take me through your history with HIV/AIDS and why you got into it and what you concluded.
Right. I moved from Abbott Laboratories in Chicago in 2000 to the San Francisco Bay Area in, no, 2000 is wrong in it. It was 1980. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was 1980. I left Abbott Laboratories and moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, set up my first biotech company. And of course, 1980 was when what was called AIDS first was called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. And that had actually started in the Bay Area, New York, San Francisco Bay Area, New York, and Los Angeles in the mid to late 70s among gay men in the nightclubs. And they were coming down with all these weird diseases like Kaposi sarcoma on their face. And the CDC knew as early as 1982 that what was going on was the chronic use of those recreational drugs, the amyl and butyl nitrite molecules, which are very carcinogenic, very, very toxic. And then, but I was not really aware of the fact that this was going on in the early 80s. It was only towards the mid 80s that it actually started making news. And then we had 1984, April 23rd, where Margaret Heckler brought out Robert Gallo. She said he discovered the probable cause of AIDS. It was a retrovirus. He called it HTLV3. All right. And so that made headlines, of course. And none of us had ever heard of this before. I only found out about that later. This was the first time anybody in the world had heard this. No scientists before. There was no publications, no studies or anything until this press conference. And of course, that, when retrospectively, you look back at that, is very, very, very weird. And Carrie Mullis, Nobel laureate, tried to find the publications on HIV causing AIDS, and I tried that for a couple of decades, could never find it. Finally got to talk to Luc Montagnier later on. And Luc Montagnier didn't know. In other words, he couldn't find anybody, who knew that HIV caused AIDS. There was no studies or anything. And so I'm going back, from before AIDS, before I knew about it, up till later, decades later. So it's a long story, but I'll get back to the 80s here. All right, so then that 1984, I had my brand new 4 years on my little biotech company, and I knew about viruses. Viruses have 4 different types of enzyme that I'm very familiar with. And I asked the guys there, what kind of protease do retroviruses have? And because I wanted to make inhibitors for it, cure AIDS, because HIV needed to have a protease. And they said, in the spartal protease, I went, aha, okay, that tells me what the active site looks like. Their little jaws. Proteases are enzymes that cut proteins into pieces. Some of them are very, very specific. They only make one cut and one particular protein, won't touch anything else. Those are very specific. Other ones well, like your digestive tract, it'll chew up all kinds of proteins, lots of different places, so you can digest it. So they're very, very important because they're modeling proteins. They degrade things, they build things, they construct things. I mean, they're just a tool that your body really uses a lot. And retroviruses, I looked into them, and their protease, that spiral protease, has to make 9 cleavages, 9 clips in the proteins that are produced, the single big protein that's produced when these cells want to divide. And it has to make 9 separate clips in there for those proteins to be then put together and build things inside that virus. And if you stop that, the virus cannot progress, can't do anything. So the HIV protease was an excellent target to go for. And so I started designing inhibitors for this enzyme right away in 1984 even. But after a few months, I dropped that because I had been working at Abbott, and they make. I was a chemist there, and I knew a bunch of the chemists, and they had a bunch of inhibitors, and I estimated they probably already had about 2,000 aspartyl protease inhibitors in the bottle, that they've made over the years. And I met in the early 1990s at the Gordon Conference. I met one of the Abbott guys, and I asked him, I said, how many aspartyl protease inhibitors did you have in 1984? He said 3,000. So I underestimated, And of course, there was no way it could compete without a guarantee they already have some in there that would work. In fact, Abbott was the first one to go to market with an HIV protease inhibitor. All right. So it was very smart of me to realize I couldn't compete with that. So I didn't spend more than a couple of months even thinking about doing that. But I was still very interested in AIDS, and I did everything I could to try to understand it. And one of the things in the Bay Area, because that was one of the hot spots of AIDS, the bookstores in San Francisco were marvelous. And I would go to these gay bookstores and look on the shelves that had to do with AIDS, and his marvelous collections of books. And I got tons of those books, all different kind of aspects of it. Looked into it just to understand about AIDS. And then, of course, as a chemist, I wanted to understand about retroviruses. I didn't know anything about them. I just knew what they were in general, but no specifics. And to really understand that, I'm a scientist. Now, we're curious. We want to know, we want to understand. So I did a lot of digging into this AIDS stuff just out of curiosity. Here I was in San Francisco, one of the hot spots of it, and needed to know what was going on. So I looked at the books, and then I studied the epidemiology of AIDS. Now we had 4 years of it, 5 years of it. And then my personal experience in San Francisco, walking around. And then it was very, very clear that AIDS was not behaving like a contagious disease. 9 out of 10 AIDS cases in the 1980s were men, and they were either IV drug-using heterosexuals or the guys who were inhaling poppers and nitrites at those clubs. And women just did not get AIDS. And then in San Francisco, AIDS was restricted to the gay community in the Castro in those early days. And you go across the street on the other side, there's no AIDS over there, And the fact that women didn't get it, it was like this virus knew whether you're gay or straight, white or black, rich or poor, or what country you live in, because it was completely different everywhere you went. What kind of contagious disease knows that? What symptoms to cause in a gay man, what symptoms to cause in an IV drug user, what symptoms to cause in a woman or a heterosexual. It made no sense. So I think it was 1985 at one of the little Bay Area meetings that we had. We'd meet at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, once a month. That would be academic scientists, and then there would be pharmaceuticals and biotech. And we'd go there for a seminar once a month. And I cannot remember a single seminar that was interesting. But afterwards, we'd always go to a Chinese restaurant, the same one, it's a very good one. And that's where we just talked. I think a lot of people went there for that primarily. I know I did. You get to meet people, set up the occasional collaboration. I set up a very nice collaboration with a guy working on parasites there. And, and it was just fun talking to each other, learning about what you're doing over there. You tell people what you're doing, just get to know each other. And then as late 1985, I'm doing then what I'm doing now, saying AIDS just not behaving like a contagious disease, and I put up my observations, what was going on, and all of a sudden everybody was silent. Nobody would talk to me, and that was weird. Scientists love to talk, and I'm a Southerner. That adds on top of it, and that struck me, man. I couldn't deal with that. I didn't know what to do. And so I even went to the bookstores even more and more and more, and studied even more. And then eventually, I don't know when it was. I think it might have been 87, because that was around when Peter Duesberg published that invited paper in Cancer Research about HIV. He's the world authority on retroviruses, and HIV is a retrovirus. And I don't think I saw the paper at that time, but I heard about it, being in the Bay Area, and he was in the Bay Area, across the Bay at UC Berkeley. So people talked about Duesberg. And then I went, wow, he's saying HIV does not cause AIDS, cannot cause AIDS, cannot do anything. Retroviruses are harmless. He mapped the genomes of those things. He knew about them. And right after, I think it was right after that 1987 publication in Cancer Research, Duesberg's, then I found out later, he was a member of National Academy of Sciences, had the Outstanding Investigator grant, and it was pulled. His federal grant money was pulled because that 1987 paper it basically shut down his lab. Fortunately, Peter had some friends in the Bay Area, some wealthy friends, who couldn't provide the same amount of money that the government did, but certainly enough money to keep his lab going, and allowed him now, he could do whatever he wanted to with this money. He didn't have to do what the funders at the NIH wanted him to continue doing. So then he decided he was going to look into the Theodore Bovary's. I'll go into him in a little bit. No, that's the cancer. Well, that's what he wanted to do was a cancer thing. So the cancer and the AIDS stuff are so tightly linked. It's hard for me to separate these two. But he was going to go to Germany to do a sabbatical and see whether or not if Theodore Bovary's theory of cancer about chromosomal imbalance, which we talked about last time, was real. Is that really the explanation for cancer? And he did that. Okay. So I stayed back and studied both. I studied the Theodore Bovary stuff, the cancer stuff, and continued on with the AIDS thing. And of course, after he came back, then we really worked together since 1996. And when he came back in 1997, we worked together on both AIDS and cancer alternating, and had a very, very, very productive collaboration. We published numerous articles on both books. I published a couple of books on it, actually 3. One of them was an AIDS novel called Jerm of Lies. I was hoping the general public might be interested in that. It'd be easier and entertaining, to understand what AIDS really is. And so that most of that story then was really from about 1996, when I joined up with Peter, that we started fighting this. Now, let's go back to the 80s. A lot of people a lot of this is going to sound really weird. So let me start off with directing people to my website. It's got over 40 years worth of information on there. And I have it divided up into various things, like one page is nothing but links to the AIDS stuff, the other one's to cancer. And it's davidrasnick.com. That's my name, davidrasnick.com. You go there, and on the home page, you'll see at the top the list of places. And then the home page has my picture on it and some books and other things. And to the right of that, there's a link to AIDS. You click on that, and there's tons and tons and tons of stuff on there. It looks pretty simple. You click on a link, and it opens up another page with a whole bunch of other links. And that's cancer. There's vaccines, drugs, and tests, science and the citizen, liberty, recommended, and COVID. I added COVID, of course, when all that started. With the AIDS stuff, you click on that AIDS one there, and there's a wealth of information, the history of everything on that. And one of the biggest ones, I was following this from the very beginning, and there is a timeline. I think people, I already mentioned that AIDS in the 80s, 9 out of 10 AIDS cases were men. In the 90s to this day, it's 8 out of 9, even though they added cervical cancers, AIDS, on top of the 30-some-odd diseases, AIDS-defining diseases, have nothing to do with each other, but they needed to get more women into AIDS thing. But as of 1997, cervical cancer only accounted for 1% of the AIDS cases that year. Now, the gay guys, a lot of people don't know this, the gay guys actually understood what was going on, just like the CDC did in 82. It was their habits with these toxic drugs. And AIDS had already peaked around the time, by 85, 86 there, when Margaret Heckler had a press conference, when you go back and you look at the year on AIDS cases. And so they was already going down, you know. And then they keep adding the things to the definitions, and it still didn't go up. But they had to keep the AIDS cases up there. And what they did, I have a graph in there that there's been, I think, so let me go to the constant, there's been a constant approximately, plus or minus 100,000, approximately 1 million HIV positive Americans between 1986 through 2023. You go to my website, you can look at it. I have the reports for each one of those years. You click on them, click on the year, and it'll show you the CDC document, whatever. And I even have, it's not on that page, though, but I have other places where I did presentations where I graphed it. And you can see over decades how AIDS, 1 million, 1,100,000, or 950,000, or whatever, over this whole period.
But that doesn't make any sense.
No, obviously. You do not have to be a scientist. How many contagious diseases, infectious diseases do that? The seasonal flu, or anything. It comes up, peaks in a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, and goes away in a few months. All infectious, contagious diseases, except HIV. And the interesting thing of it is a constant 1 million, plus or minus 100,000, for decades. Now that is really, really bizarre. And I tell you how they get that constant 1 million before I forget about it, because, like I say, it's a tree with 1,000 limbs. The HIV test, good place to bring this up. They don't actually diagnose diseases. Remember, the 30-some-odd AIDS-defining diseases and non-diseases were present before AIDS. All right, they weren't called AIDS or anything. They were called this particular disease, that disease. But if a person happened to test positive on one of the antibody tests or PCR tests, then whatever disease they had, cervical cancer, for example, in women, and they tested positive, they had AIDS. Not cervical cancer anymore, they had AIDS. Or pneumocystis carinii pneumonia or some of those things, they no longer had that, they had AIDS. And it was by definition. And they had a test to do that. In fact, Anthony Fauci was brought in 1984, in November of 1984, as head of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And his job, I'm looking now, retrospectively, I didn't know it at the time, but his job was to turn all these non-infectious diseases into infectious diseases. And he'd been doing that for decades. the AIDS, the MERS, the SARS, the Ebola, all of them, the COVID, all of those things, he was turning those things into contagious infectious diseases, and AIDS was the first one, and it was the only one that really took until COVID. All right, and that's exposed. I mean, a lot of stuff what he's done has been exposed now. So it took 4 decades to get the truth out there to most people, And let me go back to the test, because this is important, because they're still doing it to this day. They never diagnosed AIDS cases based on symptoms. It was with these tests. And the antibody test was the first one. Now, nobody's ever been able to detect HIV, the supposed cause of AIDS, in a human being. That the public doesn't know that. But you go to the package inserts that come with the test, PCR, I forget what the other antibody one was called now, but they dropped it pretty quick. PCR and the antibody one. When they
ELISA, I think it's ELISA, isn't it?
The ELISA, yeah. Well, I mean that's an antibody thing, but it was a cultured one that I'm talking about. And anyway, the antibody test was the one that was the big one. And when you get down there and you look at the accuracy of the test, where they give you the details, they said they had no authentic virus to evaluate the antibody test to see what was a true positive and what was a false positive. Okay, they didn't have a reference virus. That's weird. If you ever come up with a test for something, you have to evaluate it against true positives and true negatives, whatever the disease is.
Wait. Sorry, I'm going to just jump in there. I just want to make sure somebody like me who's not scientific gets what you're saying. So an antibody would be like the shadow of the person. And in order for you to know what the shadow is, you need to know what the person is.
Yeah, but it's not even a shadow, but that's not a bad analogy. What it is, the antibodies are your immune system, part of the immune system that binds to the thing that you're interested in, like HIV, like the virus HIV, and your body, your immune system makes antibodies against it specifically for that thing in order to eliminate it, and it learns, has a memory for in the future. If it ever sees that thing again, it gets it before it has time to make symptoms. All right, so they didn't have the virus. They didn't have the cause. Nobody had the cause. That was one of the things about Carrie Mullis and Luc Montagnier. Nobody has ever discovered the cause of AIDS. They didn't. They got Nobel Prize for it. Montagnier got Nobel Prize for discovering HIV, not proving that it causes AIDS. And he didn't actually prove it had HIV because he couldn't. He sent the tissue sample to Robert Gallo, and Robert Gallo was the one that manufactured HIV in the cell culture. He couldn't culture it, so he had to manufacture it the way he did with his other HTLVs. All right, and you see why the audience will see how this is a tree with 1,000 limbs. This stuff is on my websites in the literature that just the public doesn't know about it. All right, but the real kicker that helped us win a lot of legal cases, over 50 of them, with the I can't remember the organization, California. It had anyway, I can't get into that right now. My mind's not so good these days, my memory. And Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, that's what it was. We had physicians, we had me, like a chemist, we had lawyers. We go around to the various states. Most states in America had felony laws against people exposing other people without their knowledge to HIV. That was a felony. Thank God it's gone now. So that's why we had this operation to help these folks. And so we won a lot of those cases just by showing the package inserts that come with the test. They admit in the package insert that they had no authentic HIV to validate the test. So they say this explicitly. The word assumed that the people were positive it was valid, that they were infected with HIV. All right, and the people that weren't positive didn't. Now, let me tell the audience again, a little bit technical here, but it helps because I was in the diagnostic division. I know about this stuff. Normally, these tests for anything, these samples from people, usually you want to keep it as concentrated as possible because you want, if there's even a little trace of something, you don't want it to go away. You don't want to dilute it away. So you try to take your blood right out, and they'll do an analysis on it, or they may dilute it twofold or something, whatever they have to do, and then they do the test. But with the package insert, you have to dilute the blood sample 400-fold, 400-fold before you do the test. Now, I know why they did that now. I didn't know it, but I knew about tests, and that was crazy. It made no sense. So the HIV test, the Asians have the lowest likelihood in general of being positive. European type folks, white folks, European, we're in the middle, and black Africans have the highest level of antibodies to this, just as a random test. So you see, it's sort of racial selective in a way with these tests. It means nothing about HIV, but the test. So in the United States, to maintain that 1 million over decades, 1 million positive Americans, before they did that, but they intentionally, like I said, the package inserts diluted the blood 400-fold. If they didn't do that, everybody tested positive. It didn't matter because the damn test was of no value. And they couldn't have everybody being positive, and they couldn't have everybody being negative. So chemistry, you call it, you titrate it down. You titrate it down. You get the thing reduced its concentration down to the point of a level that you can maintain it and it'll work for you. It'll give you the positives that you want. To maintain 100,000 plus or a million plus or minus 100,000 on an annual basis, that's where that 400-fold dilution came from. That allows them to keep that number of roughly 1 million every year. If they didn't dilute it, it would be the population of the United States every year. So I mean, that's where it came from. Every aspect, everything that we were told, everything that was used was a fraud with AIDS. Not a single thing was true to the public, and not in the scientific literature. Okay, enough about that. We can move on to whatever else you want to.
Right. Okay, so now where does the monkey in Africa story come from?
Oh, yeah, well, let me get into that. The definition. Remember, it was 1984 where we had AIDS. In 1985, I think it was, could have been 86, the United States pressured the World Health Organization to come up with the definition for AIDS in Africa. And that was held in Bangui, the capital, Central African Republic. All right? And HIV is not part of the definition. HIV is not part of the definition of AIDS in Africa. So they came up with fever, diarrhea, persistent cough, weight loss, and TB. The diseases of poverty and malnutrition, by definition, were turned into AIDS in Africa. Just like the diseases in the United States, were turned into AIDS, not by a definition per se, but by a test, HIV test. And then by definition after that, if you're positive, then you no longer have TB or whatever it was, or cancer. You have AIDS. And in Africa, if you're poor or had some sort of infection or whatever it was, fever, diarrhea, persistent weight loss, and TB. I mean, you're an AIDS case in Africa. They just turned the normal diseases of poverty and malnutrition into AIDS. So they didn't use a test. Something
that always comes up is CD4 count.
Okay, CD4 T cells. There are a certain type of, our immune system is massive. I think the only thing more complicated than that's the nervous system, but maybe it's even more, nobody knows. And there's all these different cells. There's the cells that produce antibodies, the killer cells, the natural killer cells, they're all different kinds. And the CD4 cells were the thing that Anthony Fauci's crowd to try to come up with some bogus criteria for measuring AIDS, like the antibodies was one of it. And then the other one, the T cells, where you'd look and see if they go up or go down. And they would use that as a criterion of AIDS progressing. If your T cell count, CD4 T cell counts, they're going down, we got to give them more and more drugs, because the disease is progressing, and then they get these really toxic drugs that make them even get sicker, and then sometimes the toxic drugs, though, will cause the CD4 cells to go up, and that'll be like a sign. They'll interpret that to mean, your immune system is boosting your immune system, all right, against HIV. That was their theory, But basically, your immune system is trying to combat the toxic effects of your therapy. And these things would go up and they would go down. It was just it was another scam, They would use the going up and going down of the CD4 T cell count any way they wanted to. If it's going down, they'd say, great, the therapy's working. If it's going up, we got to give you more therapy or change your therapy, So it was part of the scam. Everything was part of the scam. It was another fake. It was another thing because it was immune cells, you see. It was immune cells that you could easily test. There's a whole bunch of other immune cells they could have tested if they wanted to. Pick CD4 cells, all right? If they go up, they interpret it one way. If it goes down, they interpret it a different way. But in both ways, it confirms or promotes the fraud. The therapy's working or it's not working. So we have to give you more. It's never to your benefit.
I have a copy of the 2001 AIDS report, which came out in South Africa under the auspices of then President Thabo Mbeki. And there are a number of scientific advisors who helped put that report together. One of those names is yours. What is your relationship with South Africa?
Well, interesting. I started one of my biotech companies in 1999 and working on cancer. And while I was interviewing one of my really important guys to help me run the company, Thabo Mbeki called me on the phone. This was, I think this was 2000 when he called me on the phone. And I really, here I was this new guy, and I apologized. I said, I'm interviewing a guy, so he called me back later. I've never talked to a head of state before. I didn't know what to do. So then he called me back again.
So the president of a country phones you and you say, hang on, I'm busy, call me back.
That's just who I am, I was with this other guy, and he did. He didn't take offense or anything. I didn't know. He called me right back, maybe the next day or something. And we had a nice conversation. He told me what he was doing, putting this thing together, bringing together people from all over the world, authorities, pro-HIV, and then 2/3 of his panel were mainstream folks, and 1/3 were people like me who were critics of the contagious HIV hypothesis. And he told me who he was contacting about this, heads of state, for example. He was contacting people all over the world, and he invited me, and of course I said yes. I mean, Lord, I wanted to do that and to be there. And, that's about the best my memory is right now. We did have a nice little chat, but I don't remember all the details. It's probably not appropriate to go into those details.
But you did advise him along with other scientists over a few years.
Yes. And at his AIDS advisory panel, and with my friend, deceased friend, Sam Schlongo, Dr. Sam Schlongo. He was really, really close to Mbeki. And Mbeki was a great guy. I don't even know if he's still alive.
He is.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I just wish I could get in contact with that man. Tell him how much I appreciate what he did and what he tried to do and what happened to him. He was like one of us, like Peter Duesberg, me, and Becky. I mean, the powers they're out there. They want to maintain this hoax. They got after him, and if you can go after head of state, you go after anybody. And the idea is to shut down the information, and they did a pretty effective job of that because his AIDS advisory panel, and that's in my new book, the part that I was participated in, never started off, never got it. Before it even got going, it was shut down. I'm convinced it was the United States when they had these 3 black Americans in dark suits that came in just as it was starting. They sat down. They wouldn't talk. They wouldn't identify who they were, where they come from, or anything. And we learned later it's come from the U.S. And they came there. And my personal feeling is that those guys were there to intimidate not the critics of the HIV, but intimidate the 2/3 of the panel who are there to support the contagious HIV hypothesis. They were, I guarantee you, they were all told in advance what not to do and to shut it down. All right. And I guarantee you, those 3 very big, very dark Americans, they're tan further south, South Africa, but in the middle of like Congo or something, they're very, very dark. And all 3 of these guys were very, very dark in these dark suits, and big and intimidating, didn't say anything. And I think they were the reminders of the mainstream people there to keep their mouths shut, don't let this go anywhere. And it worked. Peter Duesberg was going to be the first speaker. He was invited to be introduced as the first speaker of the panel, and somebody of the mainstream jumped up really loud and said, no presentations, no presentations, and that almost stopped, everything. I mean, here you are. How are you going to have a meeting where you discuss something if you can't show your arguments and your evidence? And the very first speaker, the world's biggest critic of the contagious HIV hypothesis, was getting ready to do his PowerPoint presentation, and they said, shut him down. They wouldn't let him do it, And so there was more turmoil, and they persisted. We were never allowed to make any presentations. They just went around the table, let people make comments and everything. And but it was phony baloney. And that was the first round, And then the other thing was we're going to have a second round. The first one was in Pretoria, and I think the second was in Johannesburg. Is that right? As I recall.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so we had these supposedly these online exchanges of questions, information, and communicate. Well, the mainstream people, and the government set this up as a private thing link for all the presenters there to come up with the agenda for the second meeting in Johannesburg. And the mainstream people did not participate at all. They set up their own internet conversations about how they were going to proceed next time. And we, other people like me, we put our information out there and what we thought would be a good list of things to talk about in the second go round. And of course, and the government was, the second time around, they were more pushy. Unfortunately, it was too little too late. They really pressed the mainstream people to make presentations. So presentations were allowed the second time around, but I got to talk. I mean, it just didn't work. There was no enthusiasm for it. It was too mechanical. Nobody paid attention. Both sides. It was doomed from the beginning. Unfortunately.
And then he was removed as president, along with his the head of health wasn't removed. She died. Remember Mantu? What was her name now? Msimang.
Yeah, Msimang.
I forget her full name now. It's quite a long time ago. Anyway, she was ridiculed internationally. Yeah. Although to be fair, she didn't present her case terribly well, but she effectively tried to argue that the way in which you deal with AIDS was to improve your diet.
Well, yeah, but I mean, she had no effect. we went to a Becky for some help. I forget. I think it's in my book though, and to deal with something on another thing. It wasn't. It was a nutritional study that we were doing when I was back in South Africa. I lived there for a year and a half or so, and Becky gave her permission to talk with us about how to proceed on this thing, and she didn't do it. Nothing came of it. So. Anyway, that's another story.
I just remembered her name. Mantu Shabalala Msamang.
That's it. Mantu Shabalala Msamang. Yeah.
And she was the butt of many jokes, as it happens. But then so was Thabo Mbeki.
Yeah. I mean, Thabo had power. She didn't. And she didn't even try. I couldn't put it this way. I don't know if she tried to do the right thing or not. I didn't see any signs of her trying to do the right thing for the people of South Africa. I definitely saw Mbeki trying to do good things, the right things for the people of South Africa. That was very, very clear. It was obviously he was so effective, they had to get rid of him.
And then immediately after him came in Jacob Zuma and a huge ARV rollout. And it just so happened, by the way, I don't know if you've looked at the data, but in the time that he did the ARV rollout, it was around about 2005, thereabouts. There was a spike in deaths, and they said it was AIDS deaths. But it just so happened to correlate to the ARV rollout.
Yeah. I mean, there was TAC. Remember those treatment action campaign people. And they were really, I think they got Western money. They were well funded. And I can't remember the number that we've heard, over $20,000 or something, but they might even had a lot more than that. And they put pressure all along. And when I came back to South Africa, 2005 and 6, I think it was, to help with this nutritional thing, they tried to make me, they were attacking me personally, saying I wasn't a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley, where I was with Peter. And they even contacted the head of the department there and got him to say, no, I was not part of UC Berkeley. But, I had an ID. I put it on my website. I had an ID going back a couple of years. I worked with Peter there for a long time, and I had a UC Berkeley ID. So, and I haven't heard a word out of it. And they used that in the court case against the fellow who's doing this nutritional clinical trials. I can't remember his name. Is German fellow, and that's where I learned about it, because I'd already gone back to the United States. In the court case, they were trying to use the fact that I was never part of UC Berkeley and to discount the other side. Our side lost, of course. You can't win down there, especially when there's no jury. You leave the decision in the hands of judges, boy.
And just to be clear, ARVs, which are actually a cancer therapy, a chemotherapy, are highly toxic.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're extremely toxic, like AZT. And did you know chemotherapy for cancer is the 6th leading cause of cancer in the United States? 6th leading cause of cancer in the United States. AZT was developed, I think it was in the 1960s, thereabout, in the United States as chemotherapy for cancer. It was targeting the DNA. And it was so toxic that the inventor didn't even patent it, And I tell you, guys, they'll patent anything. It was so toxic they didn't want to waste their time. So, and then Peter Duisberg, as soon as the AZT came out, he ordered a bottle of AZT from chemical labs. I think it might have been Sigma or someplace like that. And they packed it, shipped him a bottle of AZT, and it has this red, white warning label with skull and crossbones on there. It tells you if you get exposed to it, go see a doctor, and all these different things. And then you look at the bottle of AZT they give HIV positive people. It's a pleasant blue and white label, no red skull and crossbones, and they knew it was toxic, knew it was carcinogenic. And journalist John Lawrenson told me personally, he as in writing, he says around 300,000, AZT killed around 300,000 gay men in the first several years. And he told me to my face that it was about 330,000, you know, the AZT killed. And in the United States. I mean, it killed more people than AIDS did. So
just to be clear, all right, AIDS, with all uppercase letters, does not exist. AIDS as an autoimmune disease, in other words, with all lowercase letters, that's a real thing.
You can have acquired immune deficiency. Take drugs. That depresses your immune system. Pharmaceuticals will do that. A bad diet will do that. There's lots of things that can depress your immune system. Some are highly toxic, some are just poor diet. But chronic drug use is one of the best ways to destroy your body. And unfortunately, that's what's going on here in the United States, probably lots of places, but especially here. Chronic drug.
The reason why I said this is because if somebody says, does AIDS exist? The answer is yes, but also no.
It's not contagious. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, there's no contagious agent that does that, like a virus or anything. But if you take a lot of drugs, recreational drugs, if you take AZT, if you take, that's acquired immune deficiency. Take a lot of injections, that's acquired immune deficiency.
I beg your pardon, I said autoimmune. I meant to say acquired.
Yeah, acquired immune deficiency. Yeah, so you can acquire immune deficiency. It's just not transmissible. It's not caused by an organism.
Listen to this. The HIV/AIDS industry is enormous, easily over 75 to 80 billion US dollars a year when you add up drugs, government spending, international aid, diagnostics, and philanthropy. One company, Gilead Sciences, alone pulled in nearly $20 billion from HIV drugs in 2024. The US government has spent over $100 billion through PEPFAR alone since 2003. This is one of the most heavily funded single disease industries in history.
It's $1 trillion industry now. I mean, not only that, but the people that are injured, the hospitals, all the consequences of those drugs are also added. The people that get injured by those things, there's billions of dollars to treat them, and take care of them.
Listen to this. The market is growing. The HIV/AIDS market is growing at roughly 3.5 to 6% per year.
Well, you got $1 trillion industry, multi-trillion dollar. The healthcare industry in the United States is the biggest. Of course, it has a huge global impact too. And you can do it. If you have that kind of money, that's poison to a society. Concentrated wealth at that level is the societal poison that we're suffering from right now. You can get away with literally murder. In fact, that's how they make more money. The more people they injure and kill, the more money they make. It's that simple. And it's been going on for decades.
Here's an interesting bit of trivia. Trump's 2025 funding freeze on PEPFAR, which I believe stands for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, threw the entire global HIV infrastructure into crisis almost immediately. I didn't know he did that. That's interesting.
Well, I didn't either, but I don't pay any attention to what he does. No, or any politician. I mean, why waste my time on that? They're irrelevant in the sense of tracking them. What we have to do, and I'm serious about this, is that and I can talk about the United States because I understand what's going on here. It is the institutional society in the United States on the national level is kaput. It's rotten to the core. It cannot be rebuilt or corrected. It's like if you have a house that's got all this mold and rotting, the boards and everything. You don't repair it. You bulldoze it, and you rebuild. And that's what we're going to have to do in the United States. Is that you may have heard about, one of the provinces in Canada wants to become a state in the United States, and some of the states in the United States want to pull out, and leave the union. And this kind of thing is happening all over the world right now, and that's natural, and that's to be expected. And frankly, that's the right thing to do. And I could go on this is another topic, like about how to. I put decades into understanding this and thinking about what to do about it. But I would keep our Constitution. I think that as a piece of paper, as principles are good. But this large centralized government, whenever you have a huge centralized government, it can never work. They always fail. Historically, for thousands of years that this has been going on. It's no mystery there. And concentrated wealth is the biggie. You get this huge concentrated wealth, and it just destroys the society. And that's what's going on right now. And I think the size of the American states are probably ideal for governing on a local basis, and you might be able to have sort of like a federation of our states, but not a federal government, not a centralized government. It's where states that are next to each other and close, they get together and work things out. They can either agree to do it or not do it or whatever, but it's local. I understood it's as early as 1980 that you do not want people in power over you who want the job. All right? And how I got started thinking about that was I realized I didn't know anybody who could run for office, like for Senate or the House of Representatives, And I didn't know anybody who knew anybody in those days, that could do that. And I realized that cannot work. I didn't know all the ramifications, but I knew that could not work. And I was right. And I stopped voting in 1980 because I realized it was totally pointless. You were voting for people who wanted the job, and I don't know any of those people, and I don't know anybody who does know those people, So it makes no sense. And even in the states that are extremely wealthy like California, New York, and even here in North Carolina where I am, lots of money is involved. And again, the people that are in power are the ones that are already rich. They have vested interest. But at least on a small scale, you can deal with it a lot better. On a large scale, we're going to have to really reduce the sizes and not allow this concentrated, centralized growth of wealth. It's poison and it will kill us.
Just so that I can horseshoe to the beginning of the conversation, HIV/AIDS doesn't exist. AIDS exists, but it's not caused by HIV.
Right. It's chemically induced. Recreational drugs in the gay men, IV drugs in the men. What used to be called AIDS, it really had symptoms of drug use. Kaposi sarcoma on the throat, neck of gay men from inhaling the highly toxic, carcinogenic nitrite inhalants, And the IV drug users were injecting it into their system. They had there were drug diseases, and they were chemically induced, and it made them sick, and it could kill them. And it probably destroyed their immune system too as a consequence.
So if people want to remove the entire narrative, they must stop going for tests.
Oh yes, absolutely. And people ask me what I do. I say I don't go to doctors and I don't take drugs. That's how I stay healthy. Back in the old days when I was a kid, the physicians had their own practice. They were individuals. You could trust them. As individuals, you knew them, you grew up with them, and everything. Now it's all these institutions, and these institutions have these protocols. Protocols are think about that. Protocols are this logical sequence of stuff that somebody's put together. It's like a computer. The idea of a protocol is it takes the individual out of it. You got to follow this. It doesn't matter who you are. Even it could be a computer. It doesn't even have to be a human being. If somebody comes in with this, you do this test, you do that test, and you move on this way. If it goes that way, then the protocol takes it left or takes it right. It's not the person. It's not the doctor. When my brother he went to Vietnam, he came back, had a very successful life, and then when he was in the hospital, at a VA hospital, and I got the death records, all his records, hospital records. There were 30 different doctors who were working on him. Not one of them was in charge. It's all these specialists, And then one day they put a feeding tube down his throat, and they poked a hole in his intestine, and he died of septicemia in 2 days. That was a machine that killed him. And the people nowadays, if they go into the centralized healthcare system, like a hospital or something, where they have protocol, as soon as you hear the word protocol, turn around, run for your life. Because the machine is going to do stuff to you, whether it's good or bad, whether you want to or not. And you talk to the people that actually work in these places, and they will confirm that.
The thing, though, David, is that there are a lot of very good doctors and nurses and scientists who do buy into the narrative. You don't want to be too harsh on them because they don't know any better.
Oh, no. I don't have, we're at war, and time's running out. I know what you said. I saw this in the 90s when I was at UC Berkeley, and saw the people there, his colleagues, other people who were tenured or whatever. They would come into his office. They talk to Peter, they'd be friends, and they would apologize. They could not join him, even though they agreed with him about the AIDS stuff. They said they couldn't go public, And then the other people who didn't have tenure, they could get thrown out real quick. Look what they did to a tenured person. They killed all his funding. They couldn't fire him. They killed all his funding. Only allowed him to teach undergraduate students instead of the graduate students. So they would punish you. There's a great book. Let me go to my homepage real quick here, Dave, and I've got it listed on here. It's called Disciplined Minds on my homepage by Jeff Schmidt, a critical look at salaried professionals and the soul-battering system that shapes their lives. I witnessed that firsthand, and it's all the pressure. Think about medical students. I saw this when I was in school, with people who wanted to go to med school. Their lives were controlled and intimidated all the way through, With scientists, it wasn't so bad. Every different profession has different controls and pressures to control you. And like if you're a professor, tenure is it. You don't want to lose the chance to get tenure. And then, so there's this pressure to make you conform. I'm not saying these people are bad people. I'm just saying that, there's consequences to your choices, the things you want to do. And you either live with it or you don't. Now, some of the people use these things maliciously, and they're bad people. The other people are just basically cowards. They're going along to get along, and I don't want to judge them. But I'm not going to support them either.
Okay, so we're coming in for the final lap here, David. What is the moral of the story?
Well, the moral of the story is society is collapsing. All right. And it has been. I've watched it in the process of collapsing. I didn't know how serious it was going to be when it started out. But with the AIDS thing, that was the first, that how something so obvious could be so controlled and manipulated at the highest levels that the public wouldn't know about it, and the people who did know about it wouldn't talk about it, and this was back in the 80s. And now the same pressure that was doing that to professionals, and still is to this day even more so, is expanding to all of society. So the thing of it is that society is progressing towards the same thing that it always has in my lifetime, to the point where it's going to crash. Just like societies have for thousands of years, big centralized societies, and that's coming. And it's already here. We're in the process of it right now. And, you're going to have to fight for yourself, for your families, for your neighbors. You're going to, and that's where we're at, It's going to take more than just information, although that's crucial. I spent most of my time, ever since February 23rd, I've done nothing but join this war and try to understand what's going on, do these Zoom things and everything. So, and more people, I've seen more and more people now are getting it.
And also, HIV/AIDS is a hoax.
It was a hoax. Always a hoax. Everything Fauci did was a hoax. AIDS, Zika, Ebola, SARS, MERS, all they're all hoax. They got away with it.
All right. You've said it a couple times, davidrasnick.com. That's your website.
That's it. Yeah. And I got 40 years of material on there on cancer, on AIDS, and a lot of other things about society, so on and so forth. You can download things, and it's just depth upon depth upon depth. You'll get saturated, I'm sure.
David Rasnick, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
It's good to be with you.